Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the SEFLIN 2017 Virtual Conference, Digital Utopia, Libraries Building Communities of Learning. The conference is going to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. My name is Josh Stone, and I'm the Director of Digital Services here at SEFLIN, and I'm going to be your host throughout the day. Before the conference gets underway, let's take care of some housekeeping. Please use your computer's volume control to make any adjustments to your audio levels. We also encourage you to use the attendee questions area to share your thoughts, comments, and questions. If time permits following each presentation, we will relay questions to the presenters. As attendees come online, we'd love to know where and what libraries are joining us today. Use the question section to add your library, city, state, or country. Also, if you're viewing this conference as a group, please type in your name of the library and the group you are with and the number of people watching with you. Today's agenda is on the screen and in the program. The program was emailed to all registered attendees and can also be found on our website and the virtual conference LibGuide. This conference is brought to you by SEFLIN, the Southeast Florida Library Information Network, and has been funded under the provisions of the Library Cooperative Grant Program, administered by the Florida Department of State's Division of Library and Information Services. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at SEFLINLib, L-I-B, and you can use the hashtag SEFLINVC17, VC as in virtual conference. As a reminder, today's conference will be recorded and made available in 2 weeks to all registered attendees. Good morning. SEFLIN and the 2017 Planning Committee welcomes all attendees to this year's virtual conference, Digital Utopia, Libraries Building Communities of Learning. Our opening keynote speaker today is Michael Peter Edson. Michael Edson is a strategist and thought leader at the forefront of digital transformation in the cultural sector. Michael Edson is co-founder, associate director, and head of digital for UN Live, the Museum for the United Nations, a new institution currently being envisioned for Copenhagen, Denmark, and locations throughout the world. Michael was formerly the director of web and new media strategy for the Smithsonian Institution, the world's largest museum and research complex, based in Washington, D.C. Michael is a Presidential Distinguished Fellow Emeritus and at the Council for Libraries and Information Resources. He serves on the Open Knowledge Foundation's Open GLAM, which stands for Gallery, Library, Archive, and Museum Advisory Board, and he is the founder of the Open Lab Workshop Initiative, a solutions lab, convener, and consultancy designed to accelerate the speed and impact of transformational change in the GLAM sector. Michael is an O'Reilly Food Camp alumni and was named a Tech Titan Person to Watch by Washingtonian Magazine. Michael's presentation is entitled Global, Local, and the Future of Community at Scale. Without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Michael here, and I present Michael Peter Edson. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I can see green lines indicating that at least the GoToWebinar thinks I'm speaking, and I'm sure our organizers will let me know if anything's wrong on your end. I'm getting applause, so I think that's okay.
It's coming through good on my end, too.
Okay, good deal. And I'm speaking to you from Copenhagen today. I've been here for 2 weeks in a series of meetings with the knowledge institutions here in Denmark, and also working on the planning and development of UN Live. And maybe I'll get a chance to talk about that project a little bit at the end. What I have in mind for you, and you can't really read my body language the way you could if we were in person, obviously, but what I have in mind for you is sort of a pretty high-level talk about what I feel are the main ideas behind why we should be working with community, and how much more massive, powerful, creative community is than what we can do mostly within the control of our own institutions. I have a couple of videos, very short videos embedded in this talk, which I think should play just fine, but I'll watch my chat window to see if there are any problems. And with no further ado, I'm going to click the next slide, and you should see a short video start. So, until the 1960s, we thought we had a pretty good idea of what the universe was made of. You, me, the Earth, the planets, the Milky Way, Renoir's The Boating Party, the pearly plastic of Elvis's guitar pick, the Great Pyramid of Giza, a finch's beak, Mozart's Requiem, and everything else in the cosmos was believed to be made up of particles and energy that we could see, touch, smell, hear, or directly measure with the instruments of science. But we were wrong. Not just a little wrong. Wrong at a stupendous, almost unimaginable scale. And the way in which we were wrong tells us a lot about how we're using technology in libraries, museums, knowledge institutions to accomplish our missions, and about the power and beauty that exists now just beyond our reach. In 1967, American astronomer Vera Rubin, fresh out of graduate school and eager to begin her new career, started working on a comprehensive survey of the rotational characteristics of spiral galaxies. It was to be a long, grueling project, quote, a program no one would care about, as she herself described it. Thousands of days and nights, working in anonymity, gathering data to calculate the speed at which spiral galaxies spin around their dense central cores. But on Vera Rubin's first night of observations, she noticed something strange. Spiral galaxies are beautiful, enormous structures with flat disk-like bodies that sometimes span millions or billions of kilometers and contain hundreds of billions or trillions of stars. But as marvelous as they are supposed to obey the laws of gravity like everything else in the cosmos. It was an article of faith that spiral galaxies would revolve around their axes like the planets in our solar system revolve around the sun, with planets closer to the center of the system spinning faster than those that are far away. But that is not what Vera Rubin found. She discovered on that night, and on every measurement that she or any other astronomer has taken since, that the outer regions of every spiral galaxy in the universe spin just as fast as their corresponding inner regions, regardless of whether the areas being measured were near the galactic center or 100 million billion kilometers away. In this galaxy, Triangulum, the outermost stars were moving so quickly that it was as if there was an invisible mass of 39 billion missing stars. Somehow, almost 90% of the observable mass of the galaxy, pulling the distant arms of the galaxy forward. So where was the missing mass? How do you explain 39 billion missing stars? And I always picture her walking into work the next morning and her boss says to her, how did it go last night? And she says, well, I think there's either a problem with Newton's laws or there are 39 billion extra stars in the galaxy that we can't find. So the universe doesn't show its cards very often, flaunting a physical reality that so clearly contradicts the laws of nature. But here was the evidence in the hands of a junior astronomer on her first night of her first project of her first job. And there were only two explanations for what she saw. Either there was something wrong with the laws of gravity, or there was an enormous quantity of invisible matter in the universe. So, of course, Vera Rubin had discovered dark matter, and it's now believed that 90% of the universe is made up of dark matter. Hard to see, but so forceful that it seems to move every star, planet, and galaxy in the cosmos. And I think 90% of the internet is made up of dark matter too. It has an enormous mass and force that often can't be seen or detected by traditional organizations working in traditional ways. And I think the dark matter of the internet is open, social, peer-to-peer, read-write, and without it, we would be working with only a small fraction of what the internet can do to help us fulfill our missions. Vera Rubin said, "We became astronomers thinking we were studying the universe. And now we learn we're just studying the 5 or 10% that is luminous. So, and let me take a brief look at the body language of the organizers. Am I still okay on video and audio? Just let me know in the chat window. So, fast forward 40 years from that night of Vera Rubin's discovery of dark matter in 1967 to January 1st, 2007. And I won't play this video given the trouble that some of you had, but it's a little montage of two brothers, Hank and John Green, making their first video blog posts with each other. There we go. So, on that day, January 1st, 2007, Hank Green, an environmental writer and web consultant living in Missoula, Montana, uploaded a YouTube video in which he bet his brother, writer John Green, living in New York City, that they could go an entire year without texting, sending email, or exchanging written words with each other in any form. Instead, Hank proposes, they will communicate only through YouTube. They called the effort Brotherhood 2.0. These are not high-end productions, and Hank and John Green are not movie stars. It's evident from watching 30 seconds of any of their videos that they are nerds, and they proudly describe themselves as such. But over the course of the more than 2,000 Brotherhood 2.0 videos they've recorded to date, Hank and John Green, or the Vlog Brothers, as they've described themselves on YouTube, demonstrate an exquisite mastery of the dark matter of the internet. They didn't start by making a website. They didn't develop a mobile app. They didn't have a marketing budget, a content review committee, or a brand strategy. They sat down in front of their cameras and started talking about the things that interested them. And in the process, they got to know their audience. Their work is social, graceful, spontaneous, humble, funny, creative, humane, and generous. It's very, very generous. And to formal audiences and institutions used to working with professional content developers, actors, videographers, and web developers, it all looks like a great big joke. But look at what happens when Hank and John Green move their experiment forward. They create the Vlog Brothers YouTube channel on January 1st, 2007. They start referring to their followers as nerd fighters, nerds who fight, quote, to reduce world suck. In other words, bad things in the world. They begin to notice that the nerd fighters are interested in social causes. They encourage nerd fighters to donate money to certain charities, and the nerd fighters respond with great enthusiasm. To respond to the enthusiasm of the nerd fighters, they create the Foundation to Decrease World Suck, a Montana-based 501c3, so that Hank and John can channel the donations of their audiences into worthy causes. They create the Project for Awesome, an online film festival in which nerd fighters submit short YouTube videos promoting their favorite charities. In 2006, the Project for Awesome raised $2.1 million for the Foundation to Decrease World Suck, which they then redistributed to charities chosen by the nerdfighter community. They began talking about Kiva, a nonprofit microfinance organization that lets individuals make small, short-term loans to low-income entrepreneurs around the world. The last time I checked, this community, formed not by Hank and John Green, not by an institution, but by the people themselves, had 50,983 members and had loaned over $8 million through 285,000 loans. In 2010, Hank Green noticed that there was no conference for lovers of online video. So what did he do? He created one, VidCon. In 2013, they rented a place you may have heard of called Carnegie Hall for an evening of awesome. that they sold out, I think, 2 or 3 months in advance. With a grant from Google, they started Crash Course, a YouTube channel of short educational science videos intended to help smart high schoolers pass and thrive in their AP and advanced classes. Of course, it's used by many, many more people than that, and probably many of you know about this website and recommend it to your visitors, your customers. This last time I checked, Crash Course had 6.4 million subscribers and 673 million views. Now, what do you do when your grant money runs out? Hank and John Green created Subbable, a crowdfunding platform that enables people to support ongoing creative work. Subbable merged last year with Patreon, a similar service, and together the Patreon Subbable community includes hundreds of thousands of people who've donated over $100 million to support over 351 creators. Founder, one of the interesting characteristics, I think, of Subbable is that it lets people support projects they love for any amount of money, including no money. That seems counterintuitive to many of us who try and raise money for projects. How can it possibly be good for anyone to allow people to donate $0 to support, to keep a project running? Well, John Green explains, it's because we do it because people who are struggling financially have enough trouble in their lives without feeling that they can't fully be part of something that matters to them simply because they don't have money. Hank and John noticed that a lot of their followers on social media and on YouTube were creating fan art. So taking a slogan of their community, DFTBA, which stands for Do Not Forget to Be Awesome, they created Do Not Forget to Be Awesome records to sell the fan-created art back to the community. This is one of the most iconic images of the Vlogbrothers, the Pizza Hank poster. The user who created this image, Valerie2776, made enough money and royalties from this project to graduate from college debt-free, which, as we know in the United States, is a big deal. Sarah Urist Green, John's wife, worked with PBS Digital Studios to create a website called The Art Assignment. It's a YouTube channel that challenges viewers to create and share their own projects based on the concepts of contemporary art. One of my favorites visits an artist in her studio who talks about the fact that static portraiture, a painting of a person, is no longer sufficient to describe a human being in the digital age. And the art assignment from the speakers out to their audience was for them to create a portrait in the form of an animated GIF and then upload it to the internet. Today, the Vlogbrothers YouTube channel has 3 million subscribers and 708 million views. They have 463 times more views and 133 times more subscribers than the Louvre's YouTube channel. And the Louvre is the most visited museum on Earth. So to summarize, Hank and John Green have got millions of avid followers. They've helped to create millions of dollars in donations to charity. They've elevated and sustained a discourse about culture, science, thought, suffering, and existence, and they're having a great time and making a lot of people happy. You know, they did all this in 7 years. I've been on website redesign projects that lasted 7 years. I've been on committees that took 7 years to write a report. And I used to work for a $1.5 billion a year company with 6,000 employees. But you've probably never heard of the Vlogbrothers or Brotherhood 2.0. Hank and John Green are working in, and they're part of, a kind of internet production, a kind of interaction that's difficult for institutions to think of as sufficiently erudite, attentive, public, smart, joyous, all of these things. Institutions don't think of Hank and John Green work as being serious enough, but it seems that the public doesn't care. It also seems to me that the public doesn't think that much of what we do is sufficiently accessible, smart, joyous, attentive, generous, welcoming, or imaginative to merit much of their attention. In the 1990s, researchers from the Urban Institute conducted a study of arts and culture participation in underprivileged communities in Oakland, California. When they surveyed local residents to find out where they got their culture, they were met with blank stares and a general reply of, "We don't have that kind of stuff around here." But when the researchers returned a few months later and asked the question a different way, who were the creative people in your community? They got an outpouring of information about the artists, dancers, writers, poets, musicians, and other creative people living nearby. It seems that the problem wasn't that people didn't have culture, literacy, writing, performance in their communities, is that they didn't associate those activities with the institutions like libraries, museums, cultural organizations that are built and funded supposedly on their behalf. In a similar vein, the organization UX for Good, User Experience for Good, held a design workshop in Washington, D.C. to help generate new ideas for accomplishing the mission of America's National Endowment for the Arts. 7 teams of information architects and user experience designers were invited to invent projects, processes, programs, or institutions that would, quote, support the arts in every community in the United States. Designers were told they would have the equivalent of the NEA's $130 million annual budget, a staff of 162, and a national network of experts. But they were not told that the project was for or about the NEA, or that NEA officials were in attendance. When the teams reported back, none of their concepts proposed to use any aspect of the existing cultural infrastructure that the NEA has spent the last 50 years helping to build. In the minds of those designers, America's cultural institutions, its museums, symphonies, operas, ballets, performing arts centers, and other cultural attractions did not seem to be an asset that would help them support the arts in every community in the United States. Online, it may be no different. In this website by Jane Finnis for the UK's Culture Professional Networks on The Guardian, she writes that the UK's 40 biggest cultural venues attract less than 0.04% of UK web traffic. Some of the disconnect between what our institutions could do online and what they do online can be accounted for by something called the clothesline paradox. This is a phrase invented by environmental pioneer Steve Baer to define phenomenon which generate great results, but which are difficult to measure. Specifically, in America, we value people buying and drying their clothes in electric or gas clothes dryers because we can see them doing that in the economy. We can see that they bought the dryer and paid tax on it. We can see that they're purchasing electricity. We can see when they hire a repair person. But we don't tend to value equally productive activity that's difficult to measure, like hanging your clothes on the line outside. Tim O'Reilly, in an article titled "Measuring the Impact of the Sharing Economy," writes, "It's quite clear to me that there's a new economy of content that is quite possibly larger than the old one, but just not as well measured, because we tend to measure value captured by businesses, not value created for users." The opportunity here is tremendous, and the experimentation that's happening in our industries is encouraging, particularly in libraries. The question is how to get these experiments, these projects, to scale up to more people and out to more people in the knowledge industries. Leaders of cultural and library technology projects often tell me that they have to fight tooth and nail for every dollar of funding and every yes of permission from their superiors. A director of a digital media group at a major metropolitan library system in the US, maybe the major system in the US, told me of a recent award-winning project that took them 2 years to bring to fruition. It's been great, he told me, but we should be doing 10 of those a year. Small projects and small outcomes aren't a question of the glass being half empty or half full. The disconnect here is that the glass, which is the internet and the dark matter of open, social, participatory content, is so huge that it's difficult for us to imagine. And it's getting bigger every minute. In his 2010 book, Cognitive Surplus, Clay Shirky asserts that among the internet-connected, educated human beings of planet Earth, there are 1 trillion free hours that can be used towards some higher purpose. 1 trillion hours. He says we use 260 billion hours a year of our free time in the US for what every year? Watching television. He says that every year, every American, since World War II, every American has had pretty much a part-time job of watching TV when they get home. So there are potentially 1 trillion hours, but that was 2010. 2 billion people have joined the internet since then. There's a website you can go to see a facsimile of a real-time counter of how many people are joining the internet. Actually, this is I didn't take this screen grab today. It's a little bit old. I think this is up there. 500 million people have joined the internet since I last looked at this slide. It's now up at about 3.8 million. 3.8 billion. And another 5 billion, the next 5 billion, are expected to come online in the next decade. Keith Devlin from Stanford University writes in the book, This Will Change Everything. Within my lifetime, I fully expect almost every living human adult and most children in the world to own one. What is he talking about? A mobile phone, a smartphone. That puts global connectivity, immense computational power, and access to all the world's knowledge amassed over many centuries in everyone's hand. The world has never, ever been in that situation before. This is an animation of smartphones sold today. And I can usually make an audience laugh when I say, I gave this, showed this slide to the board of a major library system overseas, and one of the board members said, that's just the smartphone sold today in my household. Ba-dum-bum. Another interesting graphic that shows a sort of the relative speed of internet users in the world, total number of websites are growing, blog posts written today. I used to be overwhelmed by this wash of enormous numbers until I realized, actually after reading Studs Terkel, I realized that there are real human beings on the other side of every one of these numbers. And when someone uploads a photo to Instagram, it's probably the most important thing they're doing at that moment. They're sharing a picture of a friend, of a child, of a cat that they love. This is where people live their lives. But we're so accustomed to the scale of attention that we get in our bricks and mortar institutions that it's difficult to understand how big the internet is and how much attention, curiosity, and creativity a couple of billion people can have. And by 2011, which seems like a long time ago now, Facebook's collection of photographs had reached 140 billion images, which was reported to be 10,000 times larger than the online image collection of the Library of Congress. And you can see the Library of Congress is represented relative to Facebook 6 years ago as the tiniest pixel that could be generated. 2 years later, Mashable reported that Facebook's image repository had reached 250 billion photos, with 350 million new photos being uploaded every day. And in 2013, 1.2 billion photos were uploaded to the top 4 mobile social sites every day. Lev Manovich, the media scholar and historian at MIT, wrote in Aperture magazine, "The photo universe created by hundreds of millions of people might be considered a mega documentary without a script or director." I love that. You can also think about the combined creative or interactive power of the internet by looking at a website like Reddit. Reddit had over 168 million unique visitors the last time I checked. They're recently changing the way that they show statistics, so it's a little hard to find out right now. And this isn't all cat photos and arguing about sports, although those are not bad things. It's not all lowbrow entertainment. Some of the top Reddit Ask Me Anything interviews are with very important people. We have Barack Obama, Sir David Attenborough, Bill Gates, followed by I'm the guy with 2 penises, ask me anything, and I was mauled by a bear, fought it off, and drove 4 miles down a mountain road with my face hanging off, ask me anything. And you might think that that's sort of lowbrow entertainment, unworthy of our great institutions, but I think about this picture from Lewis and Clark's, it's in many, many high school history books of Lewis and Clark's first encounter with a grizzly bear. Or in the art museum context, Hieronymus Bosch. Studs Terkel, who I mentioned earlier, the great Chicago legendary journalist and storyteller, wrote, "People are hungry for stories. It's part of our very being. Storytelling is a form of history, of immortality too. It goes from one generation to another." And Cory Doctorow, in his book Information Doesn't Want to Be Free, talks about the way that we build our community through trivial interactions, through waving hello to a neighbor when we take our trash out or when we walk the dog, talking about what we had for dinner last night or what the kids are doing at school. He says the momentous, the deep ties of community and civilization arise only from the trivial. But is this digital stuff as good as valuable to the world as a visit to a cultural institution, a library, a research institution, a memory institution? Is it as good? I often am asked that by leaders of institutions, not really often by community librarians, but often levels higher up, so-called. I think you all are at the top. But when I get this pushback, I tell people, Google the phrase "TED Talk made me cry" and look at some of the results that come back. Some of my favorites are a story about knots and surgeons. Ed Gavigan tells a story about the night he was stabbed in New York City. Wonderful story by mute quadriplegic Henry Evans and the roboticist Chad Jenkins. And Mr. Evans talks about the way in which robotics and quadcopters helped reconnect him to life. I'm getting chills myself talking about these things, so forgive me if I get a little verklempt. And then Sugata Mitra's talk, The Child-Driven Education. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these talks. So think about those, and watch those, I tell people. And then think about what often happens in a museum, which we hold as the top of the pyramid of sort of cultural knowledge, history, experiences. Beth Harris, the former Dean of Art and History at the Khan Academy and former head of education at the Museum of Modern Art, writes, or told me, a museum visit isn't this amazing, contemplative, aesthetic, transcendent experience. It's jostling crowds, it's feeling hungry, it's being annoyed by the people you're with sometimes, it's feeling disappointed that you can't have the reaction that the museum wants you to have, that you don't have, that you don't have the knowledge and background to get there. I mean, it's a whole range of complicated things. And the Smithsonian Institution, in their 2001 report, Art Museums and the Public, wrote, one of the most striking results of this generation worth of museum audience studies is that explicit aims of exhibition planners are rarely achieved to any significant degree. Brewster Kahle, who many of you know as the founder of the Internet Archive, writes, the people who are supposed to be doing universal access to knowledge, and by that he means, I think, research libraries in the US, and are getting $12 billion a year to do it, are not getting the job done. But does the public have to settle for what our official institutions give them? I doubt it. In this book, Without Their Permission, How the 21st Century Will Be Made, Not Managed, Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, writes that during the Industrial Revolution you had to open a factory. With the Internet Revolution you only have to open a laptop. Some of this may seem so obvious to us now, but I'm always surprised at how many people still don't understand or think about this view of Internet culture. William Gibson wrote, the future has arrived, it's just not evenly distributed yet. This idea of people, rogues and interlopers, creating more value than traditional 20th century institutions, he calls permissionless innovation. And I think it's one of the most powerful forces out there. I've talked about this exact pattern of creating in one of my other presentations that's up online on my SlideShare account, slideshare.net/Edson M. One of the most famous examples of permissionless innovation is that the Sunlight Foundation redesigned the website of the US Supreme Court without their permission. They found that on the Supreme Court's old website you couldn't search for cases, there was no calendar, there were no PDF documents of past case law. So what did they do? They created a new website by themselves and they offered it back to the Supreme Court for free. And to their credit, the court adopted many of their designs and recommendations. Another example is from the art historian Alexandra Cori, who was frustrated at the Uffizi Gallery in Italy's reluctance to put information and educational materials online. So she was an art historian, not a computer programmer or a software developer, but she took a summer off, and instead of going to the beach, she and her husband watched YouTube videos about how to make smartphone apps. And they made an ebook, Android, and iPhone application that was an online guide, a digital guide to visiting the Uffizi Gallery. And she did it without their permission. Another example is Museum Hack. Nick Gray was brought to a museum for the first time with a girlfriend, or with a girl he liked, and found it fascinating but poorly interpreted. So to make a long story short, he created a business of taking small groups through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and now in museums all over the world, to take an irreverent but highly engaging and educational tour of these institutions. And this video that I tried to show at the beginning of the presentation, Mick Jones playing Train in Vain at the opening of the Rock and Roll Public Library, and that video is very easily findable online. I know that the organizers are very helpfully posting links as I talk. This video was not filmed as an official production. by the library. They didn't hire a videographer or a script writer or anything, but they didn't stop visitors from filming and posting either. And I managed to track down this woman, Isabella Cudaro, who's Brazilian, who was in town on vacation, heard about this opening. She loves Mick Jones and The Clash, and she talked her way into the opening by telling the guards that she had come such a long way from Brazil. And she did what came naturally. She shot actually a very poor quality video to share with her friends back home. And I found Isabella, and we wrote back and forth a little bit. She wrote to me, "The space was very small, and I think it created this intimate mood. The concert was very emotional. I cried a lot when Mick Jones talked about Joe Strummer, and he cried too, especially when he played Stay Free. I recorded it to remember and to show my friends here in Brazil this special day. I'm very surprised that people around the world are still seeing this video and write thanking me for sharing this moment. It is amazing." And it is amazing. This video has 438,000 views. Passionate, creative, sharing people like Isabella Cudaro are everywhere. We need only to look for them and meet them at eye level as friends. It's often forgotten that Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim, designed the World Wide Web to have a remarkable central characteristic. Everyone who joined would automatically be granted the right both to consume and produce, to read and write on equal footing with everyone else. Here's Sir Tim typing at the opening of the London Olympics. "This web is for everyone." He wrote, "The idea was that anyone who used the web would have a space where they could write. And so the first browser was an editor. It was a writer as well as a reader. Every person who used the web had the ability to write something. The architecture of the World Wide Web is built upon these humanistic, democratic ideals that have a lot to do with libraries. And we can do a lot of good with them if we make wise choices and concentrate our efforts where they'll matter the most. Everyone means everyone." So, until recently, we thought we had a pretty good idea of what museums, libraries, knowledge institutions, universities were made of. But we were wrong. Not just a little wrong. Wrong at a stupendous, almost unimaginable scale. Like the universe before Vera Rubin discovered dark matter, we were seeing only the small percentage of cultural activity that we expected to see, where we expected to see it, when we expected to see it. Libraries, museums, archives can play a huge role in the story of how Earth's 7 billion citizens will lead their lives, make and participate in their culture, learn, share, invent, create, cry, laugh, and do things together in the future. And that's true whether it's at the smallest local community level, regionally, nationally, or globally. We can do this if we begin to work with true conviction in the areas of the internet that are less familiar to us and more familiar to the public. Towards the end of her career, Vera Rubin wrote, "In a very real sense, astronomy begins anew. The joy and fun of understanding the universe we bequeath to our grandchildren and to their grandchildren. With over 90% of the matter in the universe still to play with, even the sky will not be the limit." And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Michael. We really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions for Michael? You can type them in the little questions section. We're going to try to get those TED Talks up in the LibGuide and on Twitter using the hashtag SEFLINVC17, in case anyone forgot.
Yeah, I'll say while questions are coming in that in this new institution I'm envisioning, I think it's a global institution with the goal to connect people everywhere to the mission and values of the United Nations, especially the Sustainable Development Goals, and to catalyze effort towards achieving that work. And I have to say that it has the soul of a strong local library. That's what it wants to be. And here in Copenhagen, in my local libraries in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia, I'm so completely inspired by the vision and values of libraries and their visitors. So it's really a privilege for me to be meeting you all today.
Thank you. So Faith says that was a fantastic keynote. James Larson says it was very lovely and inspiring. And no questions so far, though. So you answered everything. No one's got a question.
Well, I don't know, but I've got up on SlideShare, I think that Think Big, Start Small, Move Fast presentation starts to say what I think you should do, how you should work if you believe these things. And then also there's a presentation I put up called How Change Happens that might be useful too. And I'll also say I'm writing a book about this set of ideas called The Age of Scale. And I've put up a foreword to that that's pretty easily findable. Maybe one of the organizers can, if you search Google for Michael Edson foreword to The Age of Scale, you'll probably find it. And that's also, it's a very poetic approach, but it describes this moment of change and urgency that I think we're in. And just wish me luck as I try and write this book.
We do have one question that came in. With so many discussions going on about free speech, what are your opinions about censorship, don't censor artistic expressions on library websites?
Wow. So I think this is one of those moments when librarianship, as I understand it, is in, there's a paradox. Librarianship has earned so much of its authority and trustedness and reputation by often not taking sides, not imposing itself on visitors and users, and not asking them of too much when they come. And I totally love and respect that. But I wonder if that trustedness and reputation, if it can't be applied to difficult work, if it's not like a check that you can never cash. So I would like to see libraries, particularly in this time of great cultural tension in the United States, take some risks and maybe stick their necks out a little bit to support difficult ideas in their communities, and also to model civic dialogue and discussion. If those awkward, problematic conversations don't happen in a trusted public space like a library, I don't know who else is going to train future citizens how to think about the hundreds of difficult, challenging ideas that not only are in front of us now, but that are coming our way. So my feeling, and part of the architecture of my own institution, which is unlivemuseum.org, is about building an institution for which that kind of risk-taking and stance-taking and modeling is part of the mission. So I say go for it.
Awesome. So no other questions came in. We went ahead and shared a few links in the little chat window. For those wondering why they can't see other attendees, that's just kind of the way GoToWebinar is set up. But if you have any questions or you want to share anything, you can do that in the questions little section there, and we will say them out loud verbally and try to share them however we can. And any links and anything else like that that's mentioned throughout the day, we will do our best to get up in our LibGuide.
Yeah, and I'm up on Twitter at MP, like Michael Peter Edson, Edson, and I'm happy to hear from all of you and also find out what you're doing in your awesome communities too. So thank you so much for inviting me, and have a wonderful, 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 inspiring conference.
Thank you, Michael. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, well, next up is going to be Karen Walker. She's going to be speaking on digital literacy, soup to nuts. Her presentation is about a small team with a big commitment that took digital literacy throughout a 21-branch library system spanning 844 square miles, covering everything from hardware basics and keyboarding to 3D modeling, coding, robotics, and everything in between. That presentation is going to begin at 11 a.m. Just a couple reminders. Don't forget that you can adjust your volume on your end, either using the computer volume, on your headset, wherever your volume controls are. If you're viewing this conference as a group, please tell us in the questions area the name of your library or group and the number of people with you. If you prefer, though, you can just send SEFLIN the group registration sign-in sheet. This conference is brought to you by SEFLIN, the Southeast Florida Library Information Network, and has been funded under the provisions of the Library Cooperative Grant Program, administered by the Florida Department of State's Division of Library and Information Services.